We're back and we're talking about autism, ADHD, and other behavioral problems in children. And Laura, I have a question, and that is, with all of the accusations that have been cast about for thimerosal and the mercury that's used to stabilize vaccinations and shots that children are given, are you against vaccinations?
Well, I'm not against vaccinations in theory. I think one of the reasons we have so much 1 in 6, as Dr. Woeller talked about, has something to do with that. But it's like fruit. I'm not against fruit, but fruit that has been genetically engineered, that has been grown in mineral depleted soil, and that's laden with pesticides, I'm against that, and I won't eat it. And I'm definitely not going to give it to an infant or a toddler who has a developing immune system and developing brain.
Good point. So we're not recommending that you not get vaccinations. There are vaccinations now that do not have thimerosal in them, and you should, if you're interested in getting your children vaccinated, you should look for those sorts of alternatives. In the meantime, let's maybe just broadly discuss what sort of nutritional interventions that the average person with a hyperactive child could use, regardless of whether the child has true diagnosed behavioral problems.
One thing, I mean, it's very simple, is cut down on the sugar. I mean, the sugar consumption just through candy, soda, ice cream, it's deleterious to their health. And for many kids, it pushes them overboard as far as their hyperactivity goes and their ability to concentrate. Another thing, too, is whole foods, whole grains, whole vegetables, whole fruits. I mean, all the refined products that we use all have chemicals, many of them artificial colorings and flavorings. And there's actually an institute called the Feingold Institute, which was established by a Dr. Feingold has been very helpful for people with ADD, ADHD, because it removes a lot of these artificial coloring and flavorings, which they know have a overstimulating effect on our brains. So just natural fruit in general, I really try to get people in my practice to start eating naturally and get away from the junk food. I mean, it's more than just toxic. It seriously is a problem for these kids.
And it's not just sugar, it's corn syrup is in everything. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just is so overwhelming to me. And I took one of my kids to the doctor, and they were saying, you know, oh, that's not true. That was an old wives' tale. They used to think that sugar caused hyperactivity in children, and it doesn't anymore. So it really doesn't matter. And
Come live at my house.
I know, and my kid's in the room, and I'm thinking, don't listen to it. You know, you want to trust your doctors, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust your doctors, but we definitely should question if it goes against what we are seeing in our kids, because I'm telling you, I don't care what research says, when there's sugar in my kids' bodies, they are just ping-ponging off the
bottom
walls.
line is a lot of this comes down to common sense.
Right.
I mean, it's really common sense stuff. You know, put whole nutritious food in your body, and your body is going to produce results. Mm-hmm. You can't put toxins in and expect for there to be health. Mm-hmm. I mean, Laura brings up the perfect point about, yeah, fruits and vegetables are great, but genetically modified, pesticide, herbicide, fungicide food, I mean, you think that's going to promote health. It just won't.
Yeah.
What about food allergies and kids that have certain intolerances or allergies to foods? I guess allergies is the wrong word, because allergies are clear with anaphylactic reactions, but intolerances, what sort of things, you know, we talked about gluten last time and casein, what sort of things would those what sort of effects would those have on a child's normal development?
Generally, most foods, and you're right, most foods don't really cause an allergy. I mean, peanuts and shellfish give that typical anaphylactic reaction. Most food reactions are food sensitivities, which for many kids are a delayed onset. It might occur hours, sometimes days later. Usually the things I see with food reactions like that is inattention and the ability to focus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sometimes tantruming, sometimes an increase in irritability. One thing that I've seen even in my own son with respects to apple juice is a flushing of his ears and a redness in his cheeks, and I can see his behavior change over a couple hours from drinking apple juice. That's why we don't give him apple juice anymore. Wow. But that's not an uncommon thing to see in a lot of kids with ADD, ADHD, is the outward manifestations then followed by some sort of,
So
change.
It would be appropriate to suggest then that if you feed children certain foods and you notice certain reactions, that you maybe make a note of that, write that down, maybe do a little experimentation of what happens when you give that child the food and when you don't.
That's right.
We have a journal actually that we keep every day, and we write down every single thing that Elliot eats because he's so sensitive to
So
foods.
sensitive to that, yeah.
And then that way you can pinpoint, well, you know, what it was that went in, or developing patterns.
You can't remember. I one time for a
That's
7-day
so
period,
true.
3 nights in a row, 3 nights of that 7-day period, he woke up in the middle of the night for 3 hours in a row. Sleep problems with autism. It's very common. We figured out from the journal it was we had white rice for dinner.
2 things people ought to consider taking out immediately with their kids: wheat and milk, particularly milk. I mean, chronic ear infections, chronic sinus infections, those 2 things alone, if you can remove those from a child's diet.
Is
their
this
health
all
will improve.
children or
Kids
children
with
who
ADD,
see-
ADHD, but
Okay.
certainly yes.
That's a great idea. We'll be right back and wrap up today's show. Don't go away.